So, thank you so much for coming in today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We wanted to start with, if you wouldn't mind just telling me your full name and where you were born.
Christine Alexandra Sanders, or Ross, as I was, that's my professional name, the Ross part, I retained that. I was born in Newcastle, 1944.
Wonderful. Where did you go to school, Christine?
Newcastle Girls High School.
And what is your earliest memory of being interested in art?
Oh, as far back as I can remember, actually. Yes. Art's always been part of my life, and when I was given things to draw with and paint from a very early age, before I even started school, I had parents that were totally supportive and encouraged my passion.
Yeah. And tell me what you did when you left school.
Well, that was interesting too, because I always wanted to study art of some form or other, and that just happened to coincide in 1962 with the art school starting its full-time program at the TAFE College in Hunter Street. The National Art School established a branch up here, and students that lived north of Sydney could actually, or in fact had to go to their regional colleges that were just opening, but that was perfect. So I did 2 years here and then went on to do my final 3 years of the art diploma at East Sydney, the National Art School.
So that was perfect timing, wasn't it?
Absolutely was, yes.
It would have meant going to Sydney otherwise?
Yes.
And how was your time in Sydney when you did the extra study? Did you do the...
Yes, the 2 introductory years in Newcastle, and then the specialisation 3 years in Sydney. And I worked in painting as my major study there. But, Sydney was great in the 60s. I mean, we'd had 2 years here to get used to being art students.
Yeah.
And then off to Sydney with other colleagues. And
I can imagine it would have been meeting a whole other community.
Absolutely.
Sort of people from everywhere around Australia.
Absolutely, yes.
And so you specialise in painting?
Painting, yes. But it was a very thorough education in those days because it was 5 years, full time, and we even did evening classes. But you got a taste of everything, sculpture, ceramics, printmaking, drawing, all of those things. We were able to dabble in, and then you made your decision in your 3rd year as to what you wanted to major in.
Which is a really good way of getting those foundational skills across the board, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The world of art.
Yes.
All the different mediums.
Yes. We're very fortunate to have that amount of time to put in to our studies.
Yes. Where was the National Art School located in Newcastle?
And that was at Hunter Street TAFE. It had been a bit of a hub for art over the years, previous to our generation, but that was the perfect place to go because there were sort of studio facilities set up that were improved and increased, and it's still functioning today.
It is. So that's the TAFE in Hunter Street near Union Street?
That's right.
Yes.
It's
a really early technical college.
Absolutely.
Yes. A long history of education.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, I did my hairdressing there, so it's sort of like had a lot of different
Absolutely.
uses.
Well, when we were there, they had secretarial courses, they had millinery, they had boat building, hairdressing. That was in the front part of the building. It really was a very interesting place to be.
Very fortunate, because I can imagine during the 50s and then 60s and even 70s, there was often that focus of women getting into secretarial work or those typical stereotypical careers for women.
Absolutely, yes.
And so the community in Sydney, did you maintain that sort of connection with some of your colleagues and students, fellow students?
Yes, I did, or we all did. But the interesting thing was that people I actually went to school with, I went through art school with, Newcastle, Sydney, and then we came back here. People like Aldona Zakarauskas O'Brien, Trish Adams, or Trish came in as a student, and then we all went to Sydney together. Then we did all sorts of other things after that. I came back here fairly soon after that because I was offered this the position of part-time teaching back at the art school. I couldn't believe my luck. Brian Cowley, who was the head of department of art at the time, contacted me when I left and said they would, it was growing, and he said, well, we're desperate for getting people in, part-time. Would you be interested in training, young people? And I said, oh, yes, please.
That is...
So it was very, very fortunate.
A great opportunity, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing was that I learned teaching on the job. I mean, I had mentors. I had people like Tom Gleghorn, who was here for a year. He was sent up from Sydney before going to South Australia. And there was Charlie Lewis, people like Andy Ferguson, wonderful people. Frank Hilton, I suppose I learned on the job, but I was developing because it was part-time, I was able to develop my art as well, along with, and all these people are professional artists. So it was a great environment.
Oh, so lucky. And,
yes.
To have all those professional skills
yes.
that you'd put into practice
yes.
is really what students need. They need someone that's got the professional skills first and then develop their sort of teaching and education.
Yes.
But without that, you really don't have much to teach without that experience.
That's right, yes.
Now, did your interest in art continue through your life? Did you have any sort of change of careers, or do you find that sort of set you up pretty much?
It pretty well did. I've always maintained my practice, my painting, but other than that, I became an art critic for. I worked at Margie Biggins recruited me to do the art crits for the ABC on her Spotlight program, and that was a great experience because it got me into the theoretical thinking about the practice and the arts, and not just what I was doing, but the whole gambit of what's available. Also, Peter Sparks, who was the art critic at the Herald at that stage, also recruited me to assist with that. And in the 70s, for about 4 or 5 years, I was the art critic for the Herald as well. So I have to say a lot of those things were fairly challenging, however, most enjoyable and very informative. Great sort of career building opportunities.
Definitely. So was that ABC Radio?
Yes, ABC Radio, yes, and then the Newcastle Herald.
And I can imagine, there would have been, like, the pressure would be on because you're talking to a larger audience, but just how much work that goes in, but how satisfying that would be in just sort of having to learn so much.
Oh, yes, it was. Yeah. Because Newcastle was developing. I mean, it had always been very involved in the arts, of course, but it was developing into new areas and it was becoming much bigger in the scope and the range of offerings for people wanting to be involved in the arts.
Yes. And did you find that, there was the arts community that they would have benefited, but just feeling they were supported in having
absolutely, yes. And there were artists that were coming and going too, that, might come and do some part-time lecturing, or, well-known artists from all over the country were coming in and being involved in the local art scene. And so those of us in the local art scene were also benefiting from that as well.
That's right. No, it's a really great collaboration.
Absolutely.
And isn't it? Just sort of have those visiting lecturers.
And the galleries were starting. Van von Berto. I remember going to evening life classes as a student, and Anne von Berto and husband Roger back then were part of those art classes. And then they started up the gallery, and then, the rest is history as far as Anne von Berto is concerned. But there were all these lovely interconnections, and we all supported each other in many ways. And I feel particularly privileged as a young artist of the time to have all of that I was able to access and be part of.
No, just wonderful. And you're talking about Anne von Berto, and she was like a magnet, wasn't she? Artists would come from everywhere to support her gallery.
Absolutely, yes, they would. Yes, she really put Newcastle on the map as far as that exposure was concerned. And the Newcastle Gallery was off and running too, firstly with Gil Docking and then David Thomas, and on it went, yes.
It's a fabulous history, isn't it?
It is.
And that's why I think Dr. Margaret McBride's recent book and her pointing out the low show women.
Absolutely. Those women were amazing. They were, a number of them, my parents' generation, and that's how I came to know them initially as family friends. And they were just so devoted and involved in their practice and just putting Newcastle on the map from that point of view of all that enthusiasm.
Yes.
They were unstoppable ladies.
They were.
Yes.
Just quite incredible. And Anne von Berto opened at a time where she wanted to support these women.
Absolutely.
So it sort of again shows that connection and support.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, just fantastic history. For Newcastle,
Newcastle,
regional industrial area that often people overlook the cultural scene.
That's right. But it's always been bubbling away, either beneath the surface or nowadays, above certainly. But there's been a need there that's being perpetuated.
And so when you do or when you were doing your artwork, and I guess teaching at the same time,
yes,
reviewing, it's sort of a lot.
Oh yes, it was almost 24/7 situation. But when I first came back here to Newcastle, my very supportive parents immediately said, "Oh well, you come back and live here with us," which I did initially. And my father built me a studio in the backyard. I mean, how lucky was I? And they lived in end of Derby Street, Bar Beach, so everything was really close. I could access just galleries, go to the art school, no problem at all. It was wonderful.
Oh, that is, quite incredible, because you're just saying, it's changed a lot, that suburb. And
it certainly has.
Hill, being
me.
Just a flat location, you can walk.
Yes. Well, it was round the corner from the beach. It was that end of Derby Street.
Yes.
And the house is still standing, which is rather nice. As we know, lots of Newcastle in those sorts of areas are now not quite as recognisable as they used to be. But the old family home's still there.
That's lovely. It's nice memories, isn't it, when a building still exists.
Yes.
And we're lucky to have the von Berto Gallery, the former gallery, still survive.
Yes.
And it's gorgeous little lane. Is it
Honeyford Lane? Yes.
So great cultural.
Absolutely. Well, she was in Layman Street, across the road before that. So the whole precinct, developed, an artistic appearance because of Anne.
Yes. So when were doing your artwork in that early period, where did you draw inspiration from?
Well, I've always been interested in landscape, the environment, the natural environment. And when I started to travel, and the first time I went in an aeroplane overseas, I thought it was amazing. I mean, not just the travel thing itself, but being above clouds, looking out. I mean, that whole atmospheric thing really influenced me, and probably still does to this day. Even though my work is relatively abstract in nature, that's where I draw my most inspiration from, and always have.
And I guess there's been a lot of people that have inspired you from the early years as a student. Maybe other students, teachers.
Yes.
Are there any people specifically?
Well, when I was, I suppose in Newcastle initially, we had there were people like Charles Lewis, who was a great great mentor and very, very supportive of students. Brian Cowley, I used to go to he was an Englishman originally, but a great colourist, and I used to do his, when I was still at high school, I'd go to his evening classes. And colour's always been a great, landscape and colour are probably my greatest passions in that sense. Then in Sydney, of course, I had people like John Coburn. He was, for my painting teacher, he was a great inspiration and a wonderful person too, personality. There were, the John Olsons and that sort of art movement were around at the time to influence me. And then towards the end of art school in Sydney, the big American and English exhibitions came out to Australia, the contemporary exhibitions, and not having been anywhere other than Australia at that stage, it was just a knockout to see all those amazing artists. And they probably had a profound influence back then. And then when I travelled to those countries, that only increased the
passion.
Yes, the passion.
Inspiration.
Yes.
To see who they've been inspired by.
Yes, yes.
Ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how fortunate to have John Coburn.
Oh yes. No, he was wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, the whole era of abstract
and design and
house, and like all I can think of is the opera house curtains.
Yes, he did. Yes.
Just really. How do you describe them? Like just colourful but defined.
Yes.
And was completely abstract, wasn't it?
But he had very firm philosophies behind a lot of his work as well. That resulted in that almost sort of it's almost a spiritual thing. He was quite a religious man, but he. The essence of colour and what it meant and the forms, took on other meanings other than just pretty patterns.
Yes.
Yes.
No, quite amazing. Because you've had a good career.
I have. I've been very, very fortunate.
Perfect time.
I was.
Yeah. Being in the best of the.
Yes, and things just seem to fall into place.
Oh, so lucky.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So what if you called yourself a natural history illustrator early, or it was more the abstract art?
Well, probably when I was much younger, and even the early years at art school, drawing was very important to me, and studying nature. I had butterfly collections, and I'd go out into the bush and sketch, and I loved all of that. And at first couple of years here in Newcastle at art school, we did go out into the landscape a lot. And that's the part I really enjoyed, and studying the minutiae, I suppose, of different specimens and things. And my art evolved from that. Some of the early work was much more figurative and that sort of thing. And it always was my favourite subject at school were art and biology. So natural history's always been there. Even though probably I've never been a professional illustrator in that sense, but I certainly, when the course was introduced here in Newcastle, I thought, this is fantastic. I embraced it and grabbed it with both hands to be part of it.
Yes. So you moved from like the technical college
yes, I did,
to the university. What year was that, Christine?
I'm just trying to think. 89, we moved from the CAE. Well, wait a minute. First of all, we were at National Art School and we were at the Hunter Street TAFE building, and then the art school sort of split. TAFE remained where it was, and then those of us who had applied for full-time positions then, because I'd been part-time up until that stage, and there seemed to be a bit more of a career path offering with the CAE. So that was probably in the early 70s. And then we moved to the campus in Parkway Avenue, the old Teachers College site. So, and that was wonderful because we had our own studios to work in and, you know, develop our professional side of things and research as well. And then in, I think it was 89, we moved out. We was the amalgamation with the university, and we moved out to you know, the Shortland campus.
Yes, yeah.
So it was quite an evolving of different. I think between that we were the Hunter Institute of Higher Education. I've probably been employed by. I've always been in Newcastle for my work, but I've been employed in at least one, two, three, four institutions. Yes.
And yeah, it's really important to sort of mention those institutions, because sometimes there's that confusion about you know, how it
evolved.
And what emerged out of something earlier.
Yes. Well, I guess I'm old enough to have been part of all of that.
Which is so good, because you get like a good understanding of like how the systems worked and organisation and then policies and teaching. There would have been a constant sort of change.
Yeah, it was. And also I found too with my teaching career too, because I'd had so much variety with all the different things, I moved quite happily between areas. I didn't feel I needed to be confined to this or that, you know, because eventually in education you're pigeonholed into this or that, fine art or design or whatever. And I used to cross all the boundaries. Yeah. When we moved out to the university and the design degree was introduced, I ended up being the first head of Department of Design for 3 years, from I think it was 90, 91, 92, because at that stage they were introducing new programs. They were bringing lots of staff in. A lot came up from Melbourne, which was a great design area of education. And I suppose because I'd been through all of that, and I was totally on board with it as well. And at that stage too, I'd started teaching on the natural history, or in those days it was called plant and wildlife illustration, then moved into natural history when we formed a degree. But as I said, I was in all sorts of camps, so I suppose they thought, you know, I could manage to run a design department and still teach in fine art.
You must have been thought quite highly of. And, you know, just having the knowledge that you already had at a time when things were flourishing.
Yes.
And there was that
absolutely. Well, there was, yes. I was very optimistic about all of those things, and I didn't feel, you know, I needed to protect anything or hide anywhere. You know, I just felt, well, good, it's great, it's all happening.
It's all happening.
And it was offering so many more opportunities for students, and Newcastle too, you know, with all the different degrees and interest areas that were being developed. And communications came on board. Yeah. That was part of our big faculty, with design, art and communications. And then we joined up with architecture. So, yes. So
that change.
Yes, and yes.
It's certainly really important era, the 80s and 90s for art and design and natural history illustration and all sorts of visual arts at the University of Newcastle.
Yes. Well, the natural history evolved when Graham Gilchrist, who was Professor of Fine Art, came on board because he was recruited from Britain. I mean, he was a Queenslander originally and gone over to Britain to study, but ended up at the Dufford College of Art in Wales, where they had a number of programs allied to natural history illustration. And when he came back to Australia, he thought, and to Newcastle, he thought, this is the most perfect place to introduce a program like that. And I'd been overseas. I'd had a year in Britain working or painting. And when I came back, this course was just beginning. And so I said, yes, please.
Yes.
And I thoroughly loved my time working in that area.
And just, again, perfect opportunity, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Everything was just evolving in front of you.
Absolutely. Yes.
step into it.
Yes. Yes.
Who were some of the other colleagues you worked with at that time at the university?
In
natural history, illustration, or any of the visual arts?
Yes. Well, there were the two, my former mates, Aldona O'Brien and Trish Wilson-Adams. And then there was people like John Montefiore, Peter Singleton, Frank Heltland. Then we had ceramics. We had Pam Sinnott, Michael Keary. I'm trying to think. Oh, and illustration, Andrew Atkins, who had been recruited from the CSIRO as a scientific illustrator. Diane Fraser, who'd come through a graphics program but she was really a wildlife illustrator. Yes, it goes on.
Some of those names are familiar. Yeah. And so when it came to I think you said it was called the
Planted Wildlife Illustrator. That was its initial name.
Yes.
And it was part of the Bachelor of Arts Visual Arts. It was one of the studies in that.
Yes.
And then when we changed, the faculty split up by then, and the wildlife illustration program was put in with design. Design became more of an area on its own, and it was split from fine art. Everything was split up in that stage. So some of us got together and thought we were going to save it, because you just didn't know. Times were getting a little bit more tricky then politically, and it was in danger of where does it lie? Does it lie with fine art or a design, which hadn't been a problem up until then. So it was nominated to go into design. So as it did, then we decided, right, why not start a new degree? Why not, campaign for one? And that was quite interesting. That took quite a bit of doing. As I said, I think I said on my speech on the opening of the Margaret Senior that I stalked Brian English because he was going to be the person responsible for the money that we needed. Because the thing was then before that, I guess we didn't even think about money. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, I suppose, but because education costs. But suddenly it became very important, and everything had to be funded. And it had to be seen to be, following the rules. So eventually, Brian was wonderful. He found all sorts of interesting ways of extracting a bit from here and a bit from there and putting it all together, so that we could start this little boutique degree, because everybody felt that it was a really important thing to do, because it was unique to this university. It was fulfilling so many needs. We were attracting students from all over the world back in the day, because students could come in at the graduate level with a science degree or all sorts of other things. They did a sort of preliminary test to see if they were suitable, but we were taking people in that were just dedicated, wanting to do it, but also contributing so much to the general cohort.
Yes.
We had people from Norway and Argentina and Greece and America and Canada, and it was wonderful. It really was.
Oh, it would have been too, because like you said, they bring something special themselves.
Absolutely,
where they come from.
Absolutely, yes.
It's got that global perspective.
It did have a global perspective, yes. And one of our former or early students, Sonia Newmov, was very interested in early IT development within the program, and she did her masters, looking at the opportunities for that back in the day before it was as acceptable as it is now, or part of what we do. Yeah. So then, because of that, we were able to tap into so much more to attract people to come here.
Exactly, and they had that track record.
Yes.
Like it evolved
It
at
evolved.
a time
Yes.
when things were well supported financially.
Yes.
But then when you knew that it had to be sustained.
That's right. Yes, and also in those days too, other countries were supporting students to come here and study, which meant that the government here was also, getting good fees and financial benefit from having all these overseas students coming in. So it was a really good situation to be in for everybody.
And so was it during that time Anne Llewellyn started to work at the
Oh yes,
university?
well she was a student at she came in the early 80s, and she was a full-time student in the Bachelor of Arts Visual Arts, and became involved with wildlife illustration initially, and was very driven, very passionate about it, and then teamed up with her partner Herbert Heinrich, who was a year or two ahead of her in his studies, and they formed the most amazing team that then drove things on. And Anne was, I think she was part-time when we wrote the degree, because she was an integral part of helping establish that. I actually wrote the program initially, and then had a huge amount of support from people like Anne and Sheila Proust, who was a wonderful admin person, to get it off and running. Yeah. And then Anne sort of started studying postgraduate level, won a Margaret Senior award, and then just kept on going from there. And where she finally finished up. She was running the school.
The school.
Good. Yes, and they all brought their own particular passion to the area and their expertise.
Yes, yeah. So you've mentioned Margaret Senior. So can I just ask, how did you get to meet or first know about Margaret Senior?
Well, in the first couple of years when the wildlife illustration program was commenced, she got to know about us, and she contacted Graham Gilchrist, who was had only been here a couple of years at that stage, and said, had a couple of phone meetings, I think, initially, because she was probably a little bit challenged, physically. So, things were had to be sort of handled delicately. And she said, "Look, I can't believe that this is happening." She said, "In my career, I couldn't really study this, and when I was interested in doing so." And she was more or less self-taught. And she said, "I just would love to support a program like this." And because she was working with national parks, doing their posters and being very involved with them, she had them on board as well. And initially, they agreed to help sponsor a scholarship program. And so it was 1984 that she came up to the first opening of the Margaret Senior Award. But in those days it was called National Parks because she wanted to remain anonymous then. She just wanted an institution to support such a program, but she didn't want to have, the association particularly. Mm-hmm. But then that changed after she came up to that first year, and we all started correspondence with her. I mean, I had the most wonderful letters from her, as did others, and she met the students. She just loved doing that. So then she was really happy for her name to be linked with it, supported by the national parks, and that continued on, and even after she died in 1995. But she was amazing, and during that time, she was so keen to keep in touch with students that we organised one in 1990 for her to come to Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. We took the scholarship exhibition down there, and she just had the best time. She was in a wheelchair by this stage, but we sat out after she'd seen the work and talked and met with all the students. We sat out in the outside facility and had a wonderful barbecue, and it was, yes, that's the sort of person she was. She was just so devoted, and she kept in touch with all the students as long as it was possible to do so, and they with her.
Oh my goodness, it sounds as if it really made the last decades of her life, like just having this dedication.
Absolutely. And even not long before she died, Graham and I would go down to, she was in, I think it's called Mole Village. It was a little age facility near Hornsby there, and we'd go down and have lunch with her, and her, and things like corned beef and cabbage and things like that. I mean, it was hard because she was so riddled with arthritis, and she couldn't draw or do anything anymore. But she had next to her bed, she had her little container with her brushes, her pencils, her watercolours, and that was like a little memorial to the life that she'd been devoted to.
Yeah. And we're so fortunate at the University of Newcastle to have the donation, the bequest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, when she,
works are absolutely
oh yes, well, when she died, she was adamant that in her will that the work come to this university, and as well part of her estate was then to be given to support natural history, illustration, and the students in perpetuity.
So lucky, how lucky are we?
Yeah. Oh yes,
And
yes.
it's interesting that you sort of comment on her personality being very modest and the focus not being on her, because the legacy of those fantastic illustrations that were sold in all those gift shops in the National Parks offices, and that most people of my era bought a poster, they had them on their wall, but they would never associate the name or know who the illustrator is.
No, I know. This was the way it was. And also, when I was in primary school, we used to get a school magazine which had stories and illustrations in it, and that was one of her early jobs as well. She was commissioned to do the illustration. I actually remember her from that.
Yes.
Back in the, I mean, the name Margaret Senior has always meant something from those years, and I suppose when she did approach us, ultimately it was, oh, goodness, Margaret Senior, how wonderful, because she was known and admired, and seen as a very valuable contributor.
Yeah, amazing.
And
so it sounds as if you sort of got to know her gradually, a
Oh,
little bit
yes.
more intimately
Yes.
once she
yes,
became part of the community and the
she did.
students and
Yes,
things like that.
she did. Yes, I did,
Yes,
and that was the memories that I've always treasured, and will, because she was such a giving person. But she was even though she didn't seek publicity, she was a very strong personality as well, and that forged her intent of keeping things the way she wanted them, and focusing on the importance of the work that she was doing and that she wanted to be seen in others to be doing as well. She was quite a feisty lady. You talk to some of the national parks people, they loved her. But, if Margaret said this is what's happening, that's what was happening.
Wow. So, like, creatively, she knew exactly what she knew needed.
Yes.
And that was others respecting her professional opinions.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yes, she was quite unique in that sense, because as we know, I mean, people in the art world, they like to be out there and be seen and let everybody know about it.
Exactly.
But Margaret, no, that wasn't important to her. Her persona wasn't important to her. It was what she could do to contribute. Was the important thing, and what she created. Yes.
And did you talk much about where she got inspiration from, or her early childhood, or any
Yes, well, she was in.
part of?
Yeah, she was in. She lived in Britain and born in 1917, and was always interested in nature and the natural world. And then when she married her husband Graham, they came out here in I think it was the early 50s and late 40s, early 50s, and they lived at Collaroy Plateau. They bought a block of land there because they just loved the Australian environment and they wanted to live in it. So they'd spend weekends, tramping, as it was known, through bush tracks and recording and just love. He was an architect, her husband. This is where, she'd always had the interest, but this was the icing on the cake as far as she was concerned. She just thought it was wonderful to be in Australia, and at that time, and to be able to be part of the environment and recording it. And I suppose that's what led to her being involved with national parks and also I think with not CSIRO, some of the state bodies that pest and weed control, things like that, where she did illustrations of diseased fruits or that sort of agriculture. She was part of that scene too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is really interesting era again, isn't it? Because people were, tramping or the bushwalking really took off in the 30s and 40s.
Yes.
And the Blue Mountains and people getting into nature.
Yes.
And the hiking clubs. But for her to sort of also merge that with the science and the ecology and disease.
Yes.
She was really thinking broadly.
She was, yes, absolutely. And then she could be quite creative because she also published a number of, was the illustrator and publishing a lot of children's books and nature books that she created too. I've got one on kangaroos that she gave to us, signed and gave to us after it was published. And she's very adaptable, wasn't she? Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and very disciplined too with her her studies and her attitude to her art. It was passion and discipline.
Yes. And so she didn't formally study somewhere? Is it something she just sort of learned?
I think, yes. I gather from she didn't do, I think she must have had some classes early on, but nothing really formal. She didn't have diplomas, degrees, anything like that. No. I think she'd probably been to sketching clubs and that sort of thing in England.
And there wouldn't have been that specific sort of courses relating to natural history illustration, I guess.
No, well, the Royal College of Art had one because I visited them at one stage just to compare notes. But going back that far, possibly not. Possibly, and actually having the ability to go into those programs was probably not easy back then either. And being a woman as well, and she did get married and then came out here and things. But yes, but she felt that Newcastle had really was that was her dream to provide a program that young people could, decide on a career through study.
Yes. And so she would have been, so amazed to think that she didn't even have to do anything about it.
No.
It just popped up in Newcastle.
Yes, exactly.
Then she found the university, and then they embraced her.
Yes. That's right. I mean, that's why she was very disciplined. She was kept her eye on the ball the whole time. I mean, to find out, because back then, it was before the sort of computer era, really. So, but she kept her ear to the ground and found out about our program. It had only been running a couple of years. But, that was her mission. That was her dedication to do that.
Yes.
For which we're very grateful.
Oh, my goodness. And what a legacy. And do you know if anyone in her family were artists, or like her parents, or
No, I don't know much about her. I don't know anything about her parents. And she didn't have children.
No.
And No, I'm not sure where it came from, but I guess too, back then, for women, sketching was probably encouraged, along with needlework and some of those other things. It was in that category, and in fact, that's why I guess a lot of the well-known illustrators back in the day were women.
Yes,
I mean,
that's right.
Gould's wife was probably very important in pursuing, the way he pursued himself, his career. So, pastime. Yes.
So she's left us all a wonderful legacy. And I think having, for students able to access those materials, it's hard to measure the impact that her and her archive has had on others.
Absolutely. And continues. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because there's just so much interest now. Yeah. It's evolving all the time. And I think, it all hopefully always will.
Yes.
And it's people like her and her legacy that keep it going.
It's wonderful. And I know there's academics are still very interested in her and her archive and her whole legacy. And you've been fortunate to be able to digitise and have available online for anyone in the world to access.
Yes.
As you know, there's been changes in the natural history illustration program at the university.
Yes.
I'm assuming that you still see that natural history illustration is very important.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's hope that somehow it will still manifest itself. I know that former staff and students that have studied the program are out there doing it, and keep on keeping on. Yes. It's so good to see.
It certainly is, and in all different sort of ways. And again, it's that creativity of where you can work with those skills.
Yes, absolutely. And people that are publishing and just embracing it. I think, and it's so important to do so. Really.